Welcome to My Therapist Says, an interactive experience enriching your most important relationships. I'm Don Welch, and I'll be your host and moderator as we present Managing Anxiety and Depressive Thoughts. Each of us experiences daily anxiety, often leading to some level of depression. Anxiety is anticipating an uncomfortable life event. For example, anticipating the loss of a loved one. The thought of that is anxiety producing. Left without any way to relieve and resolve this anxiety, depression typically follows. Your emotions may scream, yes, I'm anxious about the loss of a loved one. However, I'm also depressed, wondering how I'll get on with my life without that person. Managing anxiety and depression thoughts is a necessary life skill. Throughout the Bible, God speaks of His peace as the true antidote for overcoming anxiety and depression. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 invites us to cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7 instructs, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. In the Bible's New Testament Gospels, Jesus often refers to experiencing His peace as the way to deal with anxiety. During this broadcast, I'm joined by Dr. Frank Ogle, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a director at a local psychiatric crisis center. He's experienced working with severe mental disorders as well as family issues, children, individuals, and couples. He has expertise in working with depression, anxiety, sexual abuse, grief counseling, and again, addictions. Dr. Ogle earned his PhD in clinical psychology at Union Institute and University, his MA in counseling psychology, and his BA in psychology are from National University. In a few moments, Dr. Ogle and I will respond to your questions and hopefully provide you with practical anxiety and depression thought management. Today's event takes place before a live audience and live streaming. While offering practical biblical solutions, it's like having your own Christian mental health relationship doctor within the comforts of your living room. I hope you will sit back, relax, and take in these life-changing insights. Please join me as we connect with a live audience and My Therapist Says. Well, again, welcome to My Therapist Says and Dr. Frank Ogle. We are colleagues at a center working together. Dr. Ogle has had a lot of experience related to depression, anxiety. He currently works at one of our hospitals here in San Diego, working with those who are really overloaded with anxiety and depression. And want to thank you for being here. You'll notice his degrees, and he also has a PhD in clinical psychology and has a robust practice of working with others both in the clinic and also in private practice. So would you please join me as Dr. Frank Ogle comes to the platform. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I want to make sure that you can hear me okay. All right. So, I come accompanied tonight. My wife is here right back there. She waved her hand and my life and my support. And I saw a couple people walk in, good friends for, about years. And is that about right? And a little what Dr. Welsh was referring to, where I currently work, is at one of the local hospitals 4 days a week. I work 3 days working with seniors. We break up into smaller groups. In my group, my youngest is 68, and I have two ladies that are 90, so I have quite a spread. And we talk a lot about depression and anxiety. And one of my 90-year-olds, she told me, I've been a worrier all my life. And if I didn't have anything to worry about, I'd find it. And I know she was kidding, and yet at that age, here she is seeking significant help for a long-term problem that has affected her life. So hopefully I can throw out a few things that may be helpful to you this evening. I also work 1 day a week with veterans dealing with trauma issues, and then, of course, in private practice, a wider range of issues. But a couple of the main things that are presented are depression and anxiety. And speaking here in a church setting, and I also teach some master-level courses at Azusa Pacific and Point Loma Nazarene. And one of the things that I talk about is that within our Christian community, a lot of times people are hesitant, afraid, ashamed to say, you know what, I'm really depressed, I'm really anxious. And so what I wanted to do is just for a moment lay a little bit of groundwork that I think is very important for us to consider. You may be here tonight out of curiosity. You may have a friend or a family member that's really struggling and you want to learn a little bit more. Or you may be here because you're struggling and want to find out a little bit more. And I think one of the key issues for me is looking at the nature and character of God. And so in Psalms 105, verse 5, for the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. And in Romans 5, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And I think a lot of times those in the church that are struggling with depression and anxiety, they forget that. That's the nature of the beast, because we forget a lot of the good things in life. 2 Corinthians 10:5, it says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So this verse tells us what to do. In fact, I met with a gentleman this afternoon for the first time, and he's going through quite a bit of depression. And we brought this up. I said, and he's from another culture. I said, the Bible tells us what to do. But I think in each culture and each age, God reveals the how to. And that's a little bit of what I hope to share tonight. So there's many reasons why people have depressive and anxious thoughts. It can be many losses in life. It could be relationships. It could be health. With my seniors, many of them are dealing with multitudes of health issues for some of them. Some of them have lost mobility. Those that had been strong and robust don't have that anymore. I've experienced that this month. I made an impulsive and maybe not a wise decision at the beginning of the year. January 2nd, I was in the kitchen. I have a 21-year-old son, and I decided to start just a short little wrestling match. And don't tell me I'm not 20 anymore, because I've heard that about 100 times so far. And what I thought was a cramp in my leg was actually muscle tearing. And so my crutches are in the truck. I asked the therapist, do you think I can walk around a little bit? She goes, short distances. But, you know, it helped me to understand, boy, getting around everywhere on crutches is really limiting. And there's many people who experiences, as we transition through life, those losses. Maybe somebody's going through a threatening illness. There could be death in the family of a friend, employment uncertainties. It could be a new situation, going to a new school, a new job. Last year, I transitioned from the crisis center to the hospital. And, I was pretty anxious. There was a lot to learn, even though I've been in the field for a long time. My boss said, "You're anxious?" She said, "Good. That means you care about the job." I said, "Okay, thank you." But there's many, many reasons why we may be anxious or depressed. Now, is that normal? Absolutely. Going through a time of feeling down, feeling anxious about things is absolutely normal. We might be sad, depressed even, if we lose a loved one, if we've lost a job, a relationship ends, maybe having a chronic illness over and over. The gentleman I met with today, 4 years on dialysis, he said, "I don't know how much more I have in me to keep going." So so he asked me, "Am I normal?" And I said, "Absolutely. Who wouldn't be?" And so, but when does it become a problem? We all have times of being blue or down or anxious about things. These thoughts become a problem when they create a level of distress where we cannot stop thinking about it. We call it perseverating on the thought or ruminating about it. When they impair our ability to function as we normally do. Maybe we end up calling in sick multiple days and just stop taking care of ourselves, like needing a drink of water. I'm not anxious. Or it brings some sort of shift in our behaviors that is out of the norm. And it remains that way for a certain amount of time. If your house burned down, you'd be out of sorts for quite a while, maybe even a year. But after a while, you'd get back on track. But for some people, that ends up for many, many years. So a lot of these thoughts about life and situations come from our core beliefs. And if you look at this tree, we have a lot of input in our youth as we're growing up. And a lot of people have input that is negative, demeaning, maybe trauma, sexual, physical, emotional abuse. And if you look at that trunk, it creates that core of shame. And we begin to look through a lens at events in life through those core beliefs about what we believe about life, and then also what we believe about ourselves. On the other hand, there can be core beliefs that are very healthy. We have a loving, confident, supportive parents, good teachers, good scoutmasters, church, clubs, and it creates in us a belief in self. We're hopeful, we're courageous, we're a problem solver, risk taker, kind, generous, and so on. So, how do you see yourself? Do you see that lion in yourself? Or do you see something all beat up and tore up? Well, what we try to get people to do is to see that lion. So there's some things that just kind of set us up to either be inclined to be depressed or anxious, and it's that biological influence. So I'll give you a little Psych 101 here. We call it the diathesis stress model. And it's that proposal that people are born with a predisposition or a diathesis that places them at risk for developing a psychological disorder if they're exposed to certain extreme, stressful life experiences. I was just teaching last night on depression and bipolar, and so something like bipolar, there's a very high incident rate of it being inherited within the family line. And then we develop different styles of thinking, unhelpful styles of thinking. And so this is so small, I don't know if you can see it, but some of these are the top left one, black and white thinking. It's either something's all good or all bad. There's no gray in there. Or maybe that other one, we filter out certain things. There can be good and bad things happening. We filter out the good and we focus on the bad. Or we jump to conclusions very often. We assume. We can have different core beliefs. Another one is we disregard the good and focus on the bad. And they're towards the right, towards the bottom, should and must. How many of you say, oh, I shoulda done this, shoulda done that. Every head should be bouncing up and down. And I tell people, okay, every once in a while, but when people get into that pattern, it's very destructive. So I tell them, you have to be careful how you say it. Don't should on yourself, all right? Don't do that to yourself. I must, I should. And then the last one is a personalization. It's all my fault. My kids are a mess because I should have been able to do better as a parent. I lost the job because I should have been able to do better. So, who gets depressed? Well, many walks of life, our seniors, young men, young women. And so what we want to do is understand our responses. And there's a physiological response that happens within our brain, a release of neurotransmitters. The brain is marvelous. It gets trained a certain way, and when it does, it really gets hardwired in a certain way. And so very often we go along a very worn path, and so there's a stress response model. And if you see the orange triangle there, the stimulus comes in, and from there it directs it to different parts of the brain. Well, that bottom red arrow, that becomes that impulsive route over to that bright red, thunderous red star there. And that's the amygdala of our brain. And that's that survival part. The limbic system is what it's called. Some call it kind of the lizard brain. It's the fight, flight, or freeze part. So we all have it. We need it in order to survive. In fact, I went to the crisis center today in a long line of cars, and some kid suddenly in his bicycle came out, and I missed him by inches. And I didn't know I was that quick. I must be younger than I think. But, I was reacting to a stimulus like that. I didn't even think about it. I saw it, I react. And a lot of times, our interpretation of events takes that impulsive route, and then rather than responding, we react. We react with an anxious thought or a depressive thought. And in retraining, learning different skills, what we want to do is learn how to move some of the circuitry from that impulsive route to that beautiful blue circle up at the top, that oval, the prefrontal cortex that's right up here, our decision maker. In girls, you women, that develops quicker. That's why you're smarter than us guys. That's why our insurance is higher, longer than girls, because we're doing stupid stuff in our cars. A few years later, it responds. But we want to train our brain to respond differently. So how do we do that? Well, one of it is the cognitive model. And something happens, we have a thought, we have an emotional response to that, and then there's behavior, we do something. And so a common response to negative thoughts and emotions is anxiety comes along, bolts us down to bed and says, instead of getting out of bed and enjoying your day off this week, I think it would be fun if you lied here for hours and thought about all the bad things you have ever done, ever. And that is pretty much what happens. Common responses to these negative thoughts: people will isolate, they will cut themselves off from friends and family, they will sleep more or less, eat more or less, they won't care for themselves, maybe just the basics, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water. In fact, one woman told me one time she just went to the bathroom, drank a little water, didn't eat for 3 weeks. That's how bad her depression was. Maybe using substances, alcohol, drugs. So what we want to develop is a series, a set of tools for managing our thoughts, recognizing triggers, and that could be a place, a person, an event, and to learn, where do you feel when you're feeling depressed or when you're feeling some sort of anxiety? Where do you feel it in your body? Because your body will tell you, hey, something is up and it's not good. And that's where we want to stop and pause, take a deep breath, observe what is going on. Americans aren't very good at this, of just slowing down and taking in what's going on, and then pull back and get the bigger picture. If a friend came to you and shared what you were feeling, you would have the bigger picture, and you might be able to say different things to them than you would say to yourself, and then practice what works. So I have 3 C's that I like, and it's to catch that thought. Begin to recognize when a negative thought is coming and catch it. And then check it out. If you had to go to court and say, Your Honor, this horrible thing is happening in my life. Well, show me the evidence. How much fact do you have? Well, it feels like it. Well, I'm sorry, we don't deal with feelings. Give me some facts. So you evaluate, check it out, and then change it. So if you just lost a job, you won't say, well, you may think, I'll never find work again. At my age, I'll never find work again. Well, a change to that's an absolute thought. At my age, it's hard to find work, but I'm going to look into some agencies and find what kind of help I can get. So we change the thought. And then managing our thoughts, quiet meditation can help slow that thought process. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. Psalm 104, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight. Getting into the habit. Remember that impulsive highway, that response in the brain? When we begin to practice slowing ourselves down, that helps our thoughts to slow down. We can meditate on God's word. We can take deep breaths. This actually engages. This has a physiological help for us to manage, because when we're all uptight with our depressive or anxious thoughts, our thoughts are spinning. Slowing down, taking a deep breath, slows us down and helps us to begin to use different neural pathways in our brain. So that's kind of the mechanics of it. And then, like the guy getting chained in bed, we wanted anxiety or depression will say, oh, I don't know, I don't think you can go out today. Partly cloudy, you're a San Diegan, you can't go out today. And I tell my seniors, I say, do the opposite. I have a couple ladies. They said, well, I wasn't going to come in today, but then I heard your voice in my head, and I knew you'd be saying, do the opposite action, do the opposite of what I feel. And I said, I didn't know I had that much power, but it's good to know. So, in conclusion, these are just some simple tools. Now, it sounds simple, sounds wonderful here when I sit in the office. Oh, it sounds so nice. But I tell people, you know what? It's hard work because we've been practicing certain ways of thinking for many, many years. Now, can God and the Holy Spirit help us? Yes. Absolutely. Therein lies our hope, remembering that God loves us even when we're depressed or anxious, and practicing. How do you play in Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. How do you change your thoughts? Practice, practice, practice. So, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. And we can change our way of thinking by these practices. So, I turn it over to our 3x5 cards.
Thank you. Would you join me in thanking Dr. Frank Ogle for his presentation? I was just thinking, you usually can tell a professor, actually Dr. Ogle teaches not only, and there's another card out there that we need to get, a question. There may be other questions that just raise them in the air if you have a 3x5 card and you'd like to raise a question, or you can certainly text me as well up front here. You can tell a professor by their humor. And so, Frank, I've actually listened to him as he's taught at Azusa Pacific University, and now he's teaching at the new program at Point Loma Nazarene University, and both of us have taught at Azusa, and I'll be teaching there as well, and I know you've already been teaching there. It's a brand new program. But I just enjoy your humor, and actually the students really enjoy it. So you can always tell a professor. They have a little bit of self-deprecating, humor that they use, and you used it throughout. So I was laughing. Some people weren't laughing when I was laughing, but I was enjoying your humor.
They don't know me yet. You get to know me. I tell my students, look, I have a dry sense of humor. If you get it, fine. If you don't, I just keep moving on. And those who get my jokes, they get extra points.
So anyway, I'm so glad to have Frank on the platform with us. Let's go to the first question. I'm so thankful for your presentation. That was a beautifully articulated design about what happens to us physiologically, but you started, which I'm so thankful for, you started with biblical concepts because all truth arises from God's heart, and that's the living Word of God that you were speaking about and helping us with. And then you went into the biology of it and then gave us some ways to actually work with this. And we're going to try to hone those as we move through the evening. We have a good 45 minutes on your questions, so I hope you'll even give us more questions as we try to respond to these. And the first question is, and you somewhat got at this, Dr. Ogle, and that is, how do you calm down when anxiety gets bad? Let's start with that. That's the first of two questions. And then the person asks, how can you focus on positive when it feels like nothing is going right? So let's start with the one, how do you calm down when anxiety gets bad? And may I start with this idea of good breathing? You actually illustrated how when someone becomes anxious, we go really in chest breathe, and that begins to constrict our ability to have a tummy breathe, if you will, or where our diaphragm flattens, just like a little baby that's on its back and its little tummy rises and falls because it's breathing without anxiety typically. And in that, just the idea of breathing, could you just elaborate a little more on that? How do you calm down when anxiety gets bad?
I hear this often, and I'll ask people, when you start to get anxious, where do you normally feel it? And I ask it because we need to be aware of what's happening in our body. Our body is giving us signals. It's telling us there's an emergency approaching. And one of the things about anxiety, you don't have to have a reason. Sometimes people will say, I don't know why I get anxious. And so one of the things to start to do is to recognize where do I start to feel that anxiety coming up? And very many times people will say, I start to feel it in my chest. And it's hard to take that real deep, comforting breath because it's that fight or flight mode, because we're ready to, take those quick breaths and starting to just remove yourself, sit down, and even close your eyes and begin to take some deep breaths. And it's going to take some practice. It's going to take some effort. And maybe even the first few times you may say, well, Dr. Ogle's a quack. That didn't work. And it may not feel like it works, but the more that it is done, the more it will be helpful. The person I saw today, he said, well, what do you think about meditation? I said, I think it's great. He said, well, what about a mantra or something? I said, we have a lot. David said, I meditate on your word day and night. And for about a year and a half, I just thought about 5 words. 5 words. The one and only Lord, Supreme Being, is current, my personal shepherd, my guide. And I said, I thought about what each of those words in different variations meant. And so that can be our practice of meditating on God's word and slowing our thoughts down, slowing our breathing down. And again, it takes some practice to do that.
Yeah, when you talk about a mantra, sometimes other religions will use some form of meditation just as an intervention. The intervention is stopping you from thinking the negative thoughts. You're helping us to see from a biblical standpoint, we invite the God of this universe into the anxiety to help us with that. That's why Jesus gathered his disciples and said, now, I need you to know that I'm going to go to be with the Father. However, God will come down through the Holy Spirit and live within you. I'm here with you. Of course, he was fully God, fully man. However, the Holy Spirit is going to come and live within you and to help us with our anxiety. So that concept of good breathing can serve as an intervention because you're focusing, as you just mentioned, Frank, you're focusing on the breathing and listening to yourself. Another piece of that, if I may just add a bit, is that sometimes we don't recognize, as you said, where the anxiety is residing in our soma, the body. And so it might be, as you were saying, sitting and thinking. Oftentimes it's the shoulders for some people, and I know you said it can be the chest, and that's pretty common, isn't it, as well? For little children, it tends to be their abdominal area and their cranium. And that's where they tend to show their anxiety. They'll have stomach aches, or they'll say, Mommy or Daddy, my head doesn't feel good. And there's a tendency for it to reside there. Some people have headaches, chronic headaches. Now, we're not medical doctors, of course. We're psychotherapists, but that have some component or origination, if you will, of anxiety that then resides in that part of the soma, the body. So if we can think of where that is and then good breathing, correlate the two, sometimes that can be very helpful in actually relieving that anxiety. Is focusing on where it is in your body, could be in your calf, could be in your shoulders, your neck. It could actually be in our jaw. And sometimes we find that when some of us will kind of grind our teeth at night, it can be right here in our jaw area that it resides. So even becoming aware of that is very helpful. Yes. So the second part of this question, there are many other things we can do. I think that's very helpful to get started. How can you focus on positive, though, when it feels like nothing is going right? That may be the person that you were talking about where the anxiety or even the depression is ruminating. It's like the hamster on the wheel. It's going fast but nowhere fast.
Right. Yeah, the perseverating or the holding on to that thought going over and over. And it is hard to think of, some people almost feel phony about trying to think about something positive when everything feels so negative. There's a little bit of truth to fake it till you make it, of practicing, focusing on a positive. Now, one of the things that I said is, what are the facts for the negative? How much evidence? Now, for some people, there could be a lot of negative going on. And I think it's okay to acknowledge, there's a lot of difficulty going on in my life. It could be with a child, it could be with your employment, spouse, any number of things. And I think it's all right to say this part of my life is very difficult. Because to do otherwise is phony. So on that part, I think to acknowledge what you're going through, and then to start to change some of that thought language. This always happens to me. This is never going to get any better. That's the black and white type of thinking, and begin to change it a little bit. And I find a lot of people, particularly depression and anxiety, often go hand in hand. We say things to ourselves that we would never, ever say to somebody else. Have you ever thought about that? Sometimes the things that you say to yourself, oh, I can't believe it, I'm so stupid. And in some way, we get it, we're upset in the moment. But really, that's laying down a kind of a pathway of negative thoughts. So in some of those times when everything seems to be bad, going bad, and it's hard to think of something positive, what's the language you're saying about yourself? If a best friend came over to you with a similar problem, would you say, well, that was a stupid thing to do. Why did you do that? Good Lord. No wonder you're in such a mess. Right? You wouldn't talk that way to somebody else. So why do we do it to ourselves? And that's part of that pattern we get into. Remember that little red path? It's like laying down a bunch of telephone wires. And we may have hundreds of them going over there, that negative route. But as we begin to practice, we start to switch it over. And it really does. Studies have been done on this, Dr. Welsh, of studying brain response and where the brain is hitting hot and cold. And they see where people actually make changes in the brain as they begin to practice some of these things. So hopefully that is helpful.
Yeah, you use the word catch, and I think that's what you're saying. So if I'm this ruminating thought I have, and we all can tend to have this, particularly people who tend to go more introverted in their dialogue with others. They go inward, think first before they speak. There is a tendency for people like that to have more of that rumination where it's constantly going around and I can't quite get it out of my thought, or I keep thinking about it as I'm going to sleep, and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm still thinking about it or dreaming about it. Let's talk for just a moment about how you catch that thought, because that's you're leading us right into the very heart of this tonight. How do I catch a thought when I'm already thinking it? So you said, to catch it, check it, and change it. That's what you were saying.
How do we catch it?
How do we catch it?
Well, sometimes it takes a little 20/20 hindsight.
Yes.
Okay. We have perfect 20/20 hindsight. So when somebody blows it, practicing, changing their thoughts, I say, okay, well, let's take a look at it. How did that go? And they're kind of going, oh, how can you be so positive about it? Well, we're here to work on that. So when you had this really negative thought and you ended up, missing 2 days of work, where did that start? How did that start? What did you notice? What were some of the keys? Again, what did you feel in your body? What were some of the thoughts? What led you to stay in bed all day? What were the thoughts? Let's take a backwards look, and then I call it 20/20 foresight. If I'm going to stay in bed all day, how am I going to feel about this tomorrow, the next day? Well, pretty crummy. Okay, so what can I do differently? Well, maybe I can call a friend or Go, sometimes just a 10-minute walk is just enough to get the endorphins going to make a change. So
the endorphins themselves at that point, that would be GABA, that would be some other neurotransmitters.
Yes.
They would help to give a lowered anxiety for a moment that would give you the possibility of accessing your frontal cortex and having more rational thought. That's what you're saying. So that you could catch the thought or even go back and look, where did this thought come from? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So sometimes a little intervention like a walk or deep breathing, some form of relaxation.
We had a former fireman in our senior group, and he had horrible back problems and a lot of pain. And he said, I know if I can just get my 2 feet on the floor in the morning, it's going to be okay. He can get going, and the pain will subside after a while. So sometimes, we come here with our degrees, but sometimes the solutions are really just some basic, simple steps that really amount to a huge change. And that's the beauty of this. I like working with depression and anxiety because I see tremendous change come about. Can I get over my depression? Yes. Can I get over my anxiety? Absolutely. That's why I like working with it. In fact, anxiety is one of those that has the higher success rates in treatment. So anybody out there anxious, hear that, okay?
Okay. So it's the fact of being able to find something positive, this attitude of gratitude is very helpful. We call it positive psychology. We actually call it Jesus. He's the ultimate optimist, and he has the power to make that happen.
Yes.
And it may be like the gentleman you were mentioning, just even finding one thing that you can do, something that is going to work, like putting both feet down and being able to. So kind of that inch by inch, it's a cinch. Is that the old phrase?
Yeah.
This idea of finding something of which you can find gratitude in. I think that's what I'm hearing. That's not fake it to make it. It's really truly finding something that's positive. This next question, it says and suggests, I have a coworker who deals with anxiety. And when he can't breathe and needs to get outside, how can I help him? So it's a very practical question. So the coworker is dealing with anxiety, but when he can't breathe and needs to get outside, how can I help him? We don't know the other part of this. And what are your thoughts about this?
Well, one quick thought that I have, sometimes a person will get so, the anxiety begins to almost choke a person, and then they become fearful, I won't be able to breathe, and then, of course, I'm going to die, and my kids are going to end up homeless. It goes quickly like that. Yeah.
Very quickly.
And I'm not making a joke about it. I have somebody who has said that before. Sometimes being able to distract a person, come alongside your coworker and say, you know what, just look in my eyes right now, just for a moment. No. Just look at me. I know it's hard to breathe right now, but I just want you to take a look at me and just focus on me right now in this moment. You're not going to focus on anything. In fact, we're not even worried about your breathing right now. You're just looking into my eyes and you're just focusing right now. And in a moment, I'm going to walk outside with you. But right now, I just want you to look into my eyes and focus. And oftentimes, just getting the person to distract and focus takes it off of that panicky feeling. It almost sounds a little bit like it's leaving anxiety and going into almost a panic.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for adults to actually regress. That's going back to a stage in time where they felt absolutely helpless. So they're back at a very absolutely helpless moment, and someone coming along and being beside us, helping us, can actually de-escalate that fear and that anxiety. Keep in mind that abandonment is the most dreadful experience of a human being, and that is being abandoned. So you're talking about someone coming alongside, and so now all of a sudden I do not feel completely helpless because I have Dr. Ogle right there helping me. Am I correct? That
Right there.
Another person.
Yeah.
So
just, you don't have to have one of our degrees. You can be there with the person.
Yes.
And but really insist on their attention, their focus.
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's hard right now. Look at me. No. Look right here.
Yes.
Look right here. Had a student one time. She had some condition where her chest started to hurt. She was convinced it was a heart attack. It wasn't. And she had a full-blown panic attack in my class. And so we took her out, and one of the students, one of her friends, was very smart, and she did that. She said, just look at me, look at me. No, just look at me. And it began to slowly help her, and then the paramedics came, and then she got help. But in that moment, that focus right there.
And there's a connection. There's something that is actually calming when we are actually have healthy eye contact with another person. And so actually my fear will go down because, again, you are paying attention to me.
I'm not alone.
Have you ever noticed that with a child? When a child becomes very anxious, you'll try to get down at their level, and you will oftentimes say that, now, honey, look at me here, look. You know, and actually they'll begin to calm down because they're not alone then. Do you see that? That's a great skill for relationships. Not saying, sometimes it's not saying anything other than maybe doing a little bit of direction like you did, but you were saying just look. So it's giving the other person the opportunity to actually focus on you without hearing lots of verbiage. Correct?
Yes. And something else, you might ask your coworker, if you experience this, would you be okay if I just reached out and touched your hand? Human touch, what happens, there's another chemical, it's another really good feel-good chemical. It's called oxytocin. And a lot of seniors, they don't get a lot of, particularly those that are living alone, they don't get a lot of hugs. So I come alongside some of my sweethearts. My wife knows I have numerous girlfriends. And, I just come along, give them a little hug. But what that does, it releases this chemical called oxytocin. And people, it's comforting. When a couple makes love, that oxytocin is released and it creates that strength of bond. Well, if Dr. Welsh was distraught or something and I just reached over, that touch would release part of that chemical. It's a marvelous reaction. That's why I wanted to study this stuff, because I wanted to understand, how do we work? It's sort of like a clockmaker. But sometimes just, you know what?
Yes.
I'm here with you right now. Let's
I feel better already. I just want you to know that.
I'm glad. I'm glad I can have that effect on you.
That's true. If you really talk about human sexuality, actually touch is one of the stronger forms of sexuality, in the sense when that is between, a male and female married couple. In that sense of that touch is so incredibly important. It's because of the bonding nature of oxytocin.
Right.
So let's move to another question, but I do feel better. I want you to know that.
Yeah,
so
good.
I appreciate that very much. That I'll be retiring in 4 months. This is the next question. This is the beauty of My Therapist Says. We're not necessarily answering, but working on questions that are real live questions today, on this day. I'll be retiring in 4 months, and I've heard that about 40% of men get depressed. I don't foresee retirement as a negative thing at all, but I've heard it's common. How do the other 60% manage to escape this, do you think?
A lot of people plan financially. They do not plan emotionally.
Yes.
You hear what I'm saying? You could have the biggest nest egg ever and get depressed. So I think you want to start planning. Take a couple weeks where you're maybe a couch potato, and then have something to do.
Yes.
Have something. I always refer to my uncle. He's 83 or 84. Just saw a picture of him. My aunt died several years ago from cancer, and after about a year, he met a woman whose husband had died about a decade before from cancer, and they hit it off. And at the youthful age of 80, he got remarried. Well, they're very active in their community. They serve on the board of hospice. He served on different boards over the years. I imagine whoever you are, you probably have a lot of skills and a lot of giftings that God can use in our community. Might be within the walls of this church, but, be a light, but plan your activities. What are you going to do? You can only go on so many cruises before you get too overweight, all right? Unless it's a Jenny Craig cruise or something like that. Who wants that? Hello? To be honest, I've been amazed in the senior group. Quite a number of them said, if I knew what retirement was going to be like, I wouldn't have done it. Not at their time. So you maybe have a good financial plan. Congratulations. Now, what are you going to do in terms... So I look at what gives you meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm. What gives you meaning and purpose? And then we also talk about legacy. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? So that would be something that would come out of things that give you meaning and purpose. It could be working for the Humane Society, taking care of abandoned dogs. It could be volunteering at the library. Any number of things, being a volunteer at a hospital or something. But what would give you meaning and purpose? And you may have to experiment a little bit. So you have 4 months.
Sometimes that can be difficult. I've seen in geriatrics that some people have been in careers that didn't bring a lot of meaning to them. It didn't bring a lot of purpose. Mm-hmm. The focus was mainly on, I got a paycheck, and it really helped my family. And they never really looked at that. And then legacy, it was the last one you mentioned. What does a person do who maybe during their work time in their life before retirement, if they did not find meaning and purpose? The 3 things you mentioned are in every philosophy class on this planet. Those 3 questions, really. Meaning, purpose, legacy. What am I going to leave? What's the meaning I'll leave with others? How will they think about me? And how will my life really have meant something? Mm-hmm. What do you advise for someone who really never reflected on that, never really had a chance because they were in a career that they actually did not like? Mm-hmm. And that's more common than not, as we know in the literature. Yes.
What were some of your dreams during that time?
There you go. Mm-hmm.
I went back to school later in life, and so I have these things called student loans, so I may never retire. But
you have too many degrees. That's the problem.
I know. I didn't know when to stop. I don't know how good my judgment and insight were, but, God led me that way, and I tell my wife, why didn't he just give me this big lump sum? And, Lord, why don't you do that? And God says, well, here's next month's payment. All right. So I would like to get involved in some art, doing some art. Mm-hmm. There are different expressions that maybe in the back of your mind you have thought, I would really like to have done such and such. Now, it's probably a little too late to want to be a, astronaut or a surgeon or something like that. Mm-hmm. But what were things that during that unfulfilling time, maybe you did that because life circumstances just kind of gave you a difficult hand to play with, and you had dreams of doing something else. What would be something that you could go into? Now, here's a little something I found out recently. If you're over 60, you don't have to raise your hand, I can guess. San Diego State has some programs where you can take courses, I heard, for free. Hello? Right? There are some things that you can still do that may add some of that meaning. I've seen people in their 70s, 80s going back to school. It's never... I hate the saying, you can't teach an old dog a new trick. Well, when you start barking, then I may believe that. But you have two legs. So it's a good question.
Yeah, and I think there's literature that even suggests, as we'll go to the next question here, that suggests that we all need a certain level of normal anxiety in the sense of a little bit of stress, not duress, but a little bit of stress because it keeps us alert, keeps us wanting to have purpose, keeps us wanting to move forward. And so there can be, we haven't really talked about that yet, there can be a level of healthy, if I can use the word anxiety, we tend to make it a red flagged word when actually it may be healthy, like I'm going to anticipate helping my next door neighbor with their lawn, or, well, not in San Diego here, but, with their yucca plants, or, but, that kind of a thing here in San Diego where we actually have a purpose. How do you, this next question moves even deeper into relationship, and I'm really enjoying Dr. Ogle being here with us today, and how do you handle an abusive relationship you recently left? So how do you handle an abusive relationship you recently left that is causing you severe anxiety when they contact you or as you learn to reclaim your self-confidence? And the person says, always trusting the Lord. So how do you handle this abusive relationship that the person has left, but somehow the other person or persons are contacting you, and it continues to, I think, sever the self-confidence of this person. Am I hearing that correctly?
It sounds like it. So just jumping to thinking about an abusive relationship, maybe it was domestic violence, physically. A lot of times, sometimes people have said, I'd rather you hit me than insult me,
Yes.
That verbal breakdown. And I count domestic violence being in that realm, whether it's emotional, physical abuse. And the average number of times, and this is usually for women, although there are abusive women, but typically the male abuser, female being abused, the average number of times that it takes for the female to actually finally leave that individual is 7 to 8 times. Because they'll end up going back and the abuse will start up again, and then it's sort of, I'm so sorry, and then they go back, and it repeats. The average number is 7 to 8 times. So if you have left an abusive relationship, I think you need to recognize how much strength that really took, how much courage that really took to do that. Because sometimes the abuser holds out, well, you won't be able to make it without me. How are you going to make it out there? You don't have any skills. You're not smart enough. You need me, kind of the underlying message. So that took a lot of strength and courage on your part. And I think you need to, part of that, I would like you to recognize that. Because the abuser will try to chip away at that. Another part, and of course, we don't know all of the details.
No, we don't.
And I don't know if there are children involved in custody issues where maybe you can't totally sever. But as much as you can, just sever the communication with that person. You're not obligated to communicate with that person. Change your phone number if you have to. Refuse emails, change your email address, a number of different things to where you really make a break and limit the access to that abuser. If there are some threats or intimidation, then there are some legal means that you can take. And you really should not hesitate to pursue that. There are different agencies that can help with that. And there's support groups of individuals who have been abused. And you want a support group that just won't be a complainers group, but a group that will really build and give testament to others who have come through and built up and start a new life.
Yeah, I think someone in an abused relationship never realizes how denigrated or demeaned they have moved to, so that it's difficult to have any sort of self-efficacy, the sense to step forward. So it's heroic to be able to
Absolutely.
say, I'm setting a boundary, I'm stepping away. One thing I've encouraged my patients to do periodically is to recognize, beautifully said what you said, to recognize that, and I use the word heroic, but the effort that it took to actually take a stand against abuse. The other thing is maybe just even to practice your statements that you're going to say or text or write or however you're going to articulate it. Practice that, say, in front of the mirror or in front of a very good friend who would say, hey, way to go, and they cheer you on. As this sounds a little nerdy, but university professors are a little bit nerdy, not you necessarily, but me, is to practice some just basic techniques and have someone cheer you on. That sounds good. Stand up straight and say that, or not that you would confront this other person maybe in person. Yet it could be that you just need to practice that, realizing that you've lost a lot of your integrity, not because of you, but because of the other person denigrating you to a lower level.
And just
please go ahead.
One quick
Yes.
one. It's an old, I don't want to tire this phrase out, but really to create a boundary. If you want to communicate with me, these are the rules.
Yes.
If there are children involved, you tell me what time you want to pick them up, period. If you start becoming abusive, that's the end of the conversation, period, and you stick to it.
That's tough to do, but that's very helpful.
It's tough to do, but I strongly encourage you, and you're training the other person that you're showing the courage that you have.
The integrity. Right. Which is very different. And they will, of course, tend to, if it's been very abusive, they'll tend to go for the Achilles, the piece that they know that they can really get your heart or really get at you. And standing your ground, having a boundary setting, that's very helpful.
Yes.
Let's move a little bit. We have a few more minutes left here tonight. Let's move to a couple other questions. This one talks about this rumination, this sense that often at bedtime and once in bed, my mind often starts racing with the day's activities. Does that sound familiar to anyone in the room?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for pulling me out of the ditch there. That this idea of this reviewing or anticipating the next day's activities. In addition, I often wake up with the same going on. Sometimes it's a song being repeated over and over. What's a possible explanation? So it's very common if someone is unable to help their brain actually decrease its fast pace and begin to relax. Actually, the soma, the body, will not be able to relax either. And then there's a tendency for that person to be awakened later because their brain is still working on it. And they may not have gone to the relaxed place where the body really, the muscles, all of the tissue begins to relax. And there's getting more oxygen. And then the fact the person is able to fall asleep. So what are your thoughts about this, Dr. Ogle? I know that we often hear this. So there's bedtime, yes. Once in bed, my mind often races, trying to review, anticipate. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to say my wife has got to stop laughing at me because I've never done that, right? Now, I think as humans, we often do that, and particularly in our world, there's so much going on.
Oh, yes, yes.
One of the things, our brain gets habituated to a pattern. And so starting to maybe even an hour before, doing some things, cutting some things out that may get the mind going. And this is just called sleep hygiene. So, turn the computer off, stop looking at the emails, don't look at the news. Don't read the news, especially right now. Everybody's against somebody right now. I don't look at Facebook anymore. You can't. It's aggravating.
Yeah.
And so we get worked up. So about an hour before, look at cutting things that really get our mind going. They even say looking at the computer or our cell phones stimulates our eyes, yes, and our neural pathways. And if you're in the habit of, just kind of playing with your phone or playing a game, and then you find yourself having that difficulty, I know it's going to be hard to do, but step away from the phone. Put it down and give yourself about an hour for that to calm down. Another thing, so there's some things about that. One of the things about kind of racing thoughts or negative thoughts, there's a thing about thought stopping. And it sounds a little bit silly, but during the day, allow yourself about 3 to 5 minutes to think about whatever you're worried about. Give yourself the freedom to do that. Set a timer, and when it goes off, then you stop that pattern. And if you find yourself you can't do it, then maybe nobody looking around, you say in a loud voice, "Stop it." I know I said it would sound silly, but this is part of the literature that's out there.
Yes.
Sometimes people, when they're anxious or really ruminating, I tell them to go to the ice tray, grab an ice cube, and hold it in your hand. I defy you not to start focusing on that piece of ice.
Right.
And just like somebody looking in your eyes, it's going to distract you from that thought. Now, if you're waking up at 2 in the morning, you roll over and you go and you think about the 20 things you got to do the next day, and you're finding after about 15, 20 minutes that you're not going back to sleep, get up. Get up out of bed, maybe grab a nice relaxing book or something, get a drink of water, sit up for about 10 or 15 minutes, and go back to bed. Here's the reason why. If you're one of those that will lay there for a couple hours, okay, I'm going to go to sleep now. Doggone it, why am I not going to sleep? If that becomes a pattern, the bed becomes associated with frustration and anger and a lack of sleep. I tell people, basically the bed is for 2 things, sex and sleep. To be blunt.
That was pretty blunt, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's pretty blunt. Well, I teach my students this, but really, and get the TV out of the bedroom. You shouldn't have a TV in the bedroom. And so, but if you're finding that you're rolling over and over and over, get up out of bed. We want the bed to be associated with a place of rest, not a place of frustration. So a couple of those things might be helpful.
So the stopping the thinking is you're actually giving yourself the ability to manage the rumination, the thoughts that may keep coming. Like, am I correct? That's what you're suggesting.
Yeah. Now, there are times, and I'll touch on this briefly, there are times when some patterns become so ingrained and maybe have that biological basis that we may want to talk to a doctor about a medication intervention for a while. Might be an antidepressant, might be an anti-anxiety medication. Well, I can't do that. I'm a Christian. I can't do that. Well, if you have diabetes, you're going to take medication. Have high blood pressure, you're going to take a hypertensive medication. Well, yeah. And depression and anxiety are just as dangerous as some of those things. And sometimes a medication is nothing more than an intervention for a period of time to give you a break so you can work on some of the skills that we've been talking about.
Yeah, those neurotransmitters that get imprinted so they begin to react even without you maybe thinking about it. And if it's associated with the bed and you're anxious, then that actually, the medication may be able to take the edge off.
Right.
So you're able to manage it in a better way. Okay, I want to ask one last question. Actually, we can only take a minute or two with this question. Is how can we move past a fear of failure? What a great question. How can we move past a fear of failure? That's a very common experience in humanity. So again, how can we move past a fear of failure?
Remember that tree of core beliefs? I have a young woman, and she's in her mid-30s. She has a lot of anxiety. And I asked her, what is that anxiety about? And she's always trying to keep her house just right and everything. And I said, and right now her husband's out at sea for 6 months. And I said, well, what does this say about you? And she goes, I don't know. And later on that night, I got a wonderful text. And she thought about it, and she texted me. So we followed up on it last week. She said, I'm afraid that maybe if I can't take care of my kids on my own, if they get sick, and if I fail, who wants to be around a failure? Who wants to love somebody that can't do these things? Nobody would want to love a failure. And I said, now we have something to work with. There's a core belief. And we traced it down where that core belief came from. And now we're going to start working on reframing, changing some of that thought. So what if you fail, what do you think that would say about you? And if you identify that, then let's dig a little bit deeper. Well, if I fail, then I'm a loser. Well, if you're a loser, what does that mean about you? Somebody might say, and I had a client say this, well, then I'm worthless. Okay. Are we worthless? No, of course not. But that's the core belief that we keep tracing down and down and down. So what does failure mean to you? If you did fail, what does that say about you? What does it mean about you? And that may be something for you to ask and answer and talk to somebody about.
It's a great way to wrap this up because you started with that, Dr. Ogle. You were talking about that anxiety tends to arise from core belief, a core belief or core beliefs.
Yes.
Which is very, very interesting. When God looks at us, He sees us as highly valuable.
Amen.
And highly wonderful.
Fearfully and wonderfully made.
Fearfully and wonderfully made. I love Brennan Manning's statement. I don't have it verbatim, but he said of Jesus, when Jesus looks at us, it talks about that He sees us, He sees the best in us when we're at our worst.
Right.
And so
Amen.
Well, I want you to, if you would, join me in thanking Dr. Frank Ogle for joining us this evening at My Therapist Says. Thank you, Frank.
And thank you so much for your great questions. And we'll be around for a few minutes.
Very good. I almost feel like I need some therapy, and I'd like to come right to you for therapy.
My office hours are.
Okay. Thank you. I want to just mention as we leave this evening that The Art of Intimate Marriage, you may see that on the screen. There it is. The Art of Intimate Marriage, Dr. Jennifer Konzen will be with us. She has a new book that's out, and she will be speaking on this very topic of which she has a tremendous background. I think you are aware that she's a certified sex therapist. She works with lots of couples. She's superb. She's been with us many times on My Therapist Says, so I'd invite you back next month. That's Tuesday, March 7th, 6:45 here in this auditorium. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we will leave for this evening. Father, thank you for each person here, those listening in, live streaming, those who are listening later at this presentation. Thank you for your presence. You are here. You're guiding in all of this. We thank you for how you've led in the discussion this evening. Bless us now as we leave this auditorium. And may, most importantly, we know that you are with us and guide us, and you give us hope in a future. And we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for coming to My Therapist Says.